aliens sent a human to die. They never expected him to return riding the galaxy's deadliest beast. The stench of scorched circuitry clung to the council chamber's recycled air, a faint metallic tang that mixed uneasily with the musk of two. Many species crammed into one domed hall. Commander Cable Barnes stood at rigid attention in the circle of light that singled him out like a specimen. His battle-worn uniform still bore carbon scoring from the skirmish at Orith's Gate 1. Shoulder plate warped and pitted where shrapnel had glanced off. The scar along his jaw a pale, jagged reminder of a Tian berserker's blade caught the light as he lifted his chin, refusing to drop his gaze under the council's scrutiny. On the raised dais, Chancellor Vorith coiled languidly in his seat, the sinuous muscles under his Celian scales shifting in slow ripples. His forked tongue flickered briefly, tasting the mood of the chamber before he spoke. "Commander Barnes," he began, his voice silken and sharp at once, "your unconventional methods have once again achieved results." His golden eyes narrowed, making the word results sound dangerously close to accident. However, the Council must ensure all of its officers operate within the accepted parameters of decorum. A faint, dry crackle came from Archon Seral beside him, crystalline facets catching the chamber's amber light. The Kian's angular frame leaned forward, every movement a chime of glass on glass. "In truth, Chancellor, I would not call his TACTICS unconventional. I would call them reckless, wasteful, human." His voice resonated like struck crystal, brittle with disdain. Cable said nothing. His spine remained straight, boots locked, hands clasped loosely behind his back. But he filed the insults away, each one a nail in the coffin he would someday prepare for them. He'd been in too many firefights to waste breath on men who thought politics was a blood sport. Vorith's mouth curved, but the smile never reached. His eyes, "Nevertheless, your talents merit recognition." The words dripped with mockery. "The Council has chosen you for a special assignment, a survey of a remote world on the fringes of the Maelstrom Nebula. Vexus Prime, you will assess its resources and strategic potential." Cable's jaw tightened. Vexus Prime. He knew the stories. A place where ion storms raged for weeks, the surface crawling with predators that didn't fear fire or steel. No reliable charts, no relays. You didn't send a decorated commander there unless you wanted. Him gone. Archon Seral's crystalline eyes glimmered cold. Departure within the hour. This is not a request. He could have argued laid out the tactical waste, the absence of intelligence, the absurdity of sending a soldier as a prospector. But the council chamber was no battlefield he could win today. He gave the only answer that wouldn't hand them more satisfaction. Understood. The dismissal was curt. As he turned, the glare of the lights slid off him, returning him to shadow. In the outer corridor, the air felt less stifling, but his pulse still thudded like distant artillery. A rapid footstep echoed behind him. "Sir Commander Barnes." Enin Sora trotted up, her blue skin flushed from the rush, a datapad clutched to her chest. She offered it with both hands, voice low. "Your mission brief. Is it true? They're sending you to Vexus Prime?" "Looks that way," Cable said, scanning the sparse details. "Coordinates, vague objectives, nothing about hazards or topography. A blank slate, the kind of slate you buried a man under." Sora's eyes darted to the hall's corners, as if the walls had ears. "No one comes back from there." "Not," she caught herself, swallowed. "Not alive." He studied her for a beat. She was green, but sharp enough to read between the council's lines. "Don't worry about me, Lieutenant. I've faced worse than whatever they think will do the job." He handed the pad back, voice softening a shade. "Take care of the rookies while I'm gone." She gave a sharp nod, though worry lingered in her eyes. An hour later, in the hangar bay's cavernous belly, Cable walked the length of his Raven-class scout. The ship's hull gleamed under work lights, patched from past fights, but humming steady under his touch. He ran his systems checks in silence, the disciplined rhythm of a man who'd done this too many times to count. Somewhere high above, the council believed they had exiled him to die. Cable allowed himself the smallest smile. Let them. He would launch, he would land, and he would come back, not as their obedient pawn, but as the ghost that haunted their ambitions. They wanted to bury him in the dark. He would make them see exactly what rose from it. The engines growled to life, their vibration running through his boots, and as the hangar doors peeled open to the black, he set his course for the nightmare world. Vexus Prime awaited. So did his reckoning. The stars warped into long silver threads as the Raven slipped into hyperspace, the deep hum of the drives filling the cockpit like a living heartbeat. Cable sat in the pilot's chair, one hand on the throttle, the other drumming absently on the armrest. The mission file lay on the console beside him, a thin skin of data that told him nothing useful. Atmospheric composition, partial scans of magnetic anomalies, and a few grainy images of jagged landscapes under a greenish haze. No mention of settlements. No mention of life. The silence was a far cry from the Orith's gate battle, where cum chatter had filled every second. Here, there was nothing but the soft hiss of environmental systems and the occasional ping from the nav computer. That suited him fine. He needed the quiet to think, to consider what the Council's real play might be. Sending him to Vexus Prime was too deliberate to be simple punishment. There was always a second layer with Vorth and Cyril, and he'd bet his last magazine it was something that would never make it into the official record. 2 days into hyperspace, the Raven's AI pinged for reversion. Cable straightened, checked his harness. "Let's see what kind of hell you really are," he muttered. The stars snapped back into points as the Maelstrom Nebula's shrouded edge swelled to fill the view. Electric clouds rolled and twisted in impossible colors, cobalt, bruised violet, and streaks of searing gold. Lightning crawled silently through the vapor, tracing jagged veins across a storm's skeleton dot beyond that living curtain. Vexus Prime hung alone in the void. From this distance, it looked bruised and half dead, its surface a mottled patchwork of swampy green and dull brown, marred by sprawling, rust-colored storm fronts that churned without rest. Even from orbit, the atmosphere seemed to pulse, as if the planet itself were breathing. Cable brought the Raven in low, breaking through the upper cloud layers. The ship shuddered violently, the inertial dampers fighting to keep up his turbulence. Buffeted the hull. Acid green lightning forked across the cockpit view, too close for comfort. Instruments flashed error codes magnetic, interference scrambling the sensors. The ground emerged in fleeting glimpses between sheets of mist. Towering spires of black rock clawed skyward, their tips lost in low clouds. Vast swamps stretched. Between them, steaming and bubbling like the contents of some colossal cauldron. Thick mats of fungus formed floating islands in the mire, glowing faintly from within, their light refracting eerily through the haze. Cable spotted a stretch of higher ground, if anything here could be called stable, and brought the ship down hard, the landing struts sinking into soft, spongy growth. The hull hissed as it adjusted to the pressure differential, the air outside registering as barely within breathable tolerance. He powered down the drives and sat for a moment, hands on the controls, watching condensation bead, and crawl down the chi. Canopy glass. Then he stood, moving to the Raven's locker. The armor plates slid into place over his uniform with practiced ease. The rifle's weight was a familiar comfort across his back. The airlock cycled open with a metallic sigh. The first thing that hit him was the smell-wet, rotting vegetation layered over something metallic and sharp. It clung to the back of his throat. The second was the heat, heavy and damp, wrapping around him like a wet shroud. Insects or something insect-like buzzed and lazy, looping arcs through the air, their bodies glinting in the greenish light. Cable stepped out onto the spongy ground, his boots sinking half an inch with each step. The swamp hissed softly all around, a constant background whisper. Somewhere in the distance, something let out a long, keening wail that didn't sound entirely animal. He raised his scanner. The display jumped with static, but through the interference, a faint energy signature pulsed from the northwest, no more than 2 clicks away. It was the first sign of anything worth investigating. A rustle in the undergrowth made him pivot, rifle up and shouldered in an instant. At first, he thought it was the wind. Then the foliage parted, and something stepped into view, a massive shape, shoulders rippling with muscle, beneath mottled blue-black fur, a pair of forward-curving horns glinting like obsidian in the gloom. Its eyes were a piercing amber. Locked unblinking on him, Cable kept his sights on the creature's center mass, but didn't fire. Every instinct told him he could close the distance before he got off a second shot. The thing didn't lunge, didn't even growl. It just watched. Easy, Cable said under his breath, as much to himself as to the beast. I'm not here for you. For a long moment, the swamp held its breath. Then the creature snorted once, the sound like a bellows in the still air, and turned away. Its bulk vanished into the foliage without a sound, as if it had never been there at all. For a long moment, the swamp held its breath. Then the creature snorted once, the sound like a bellows in the still air, and turned away. Its bulk vanished into the foliage without a sound, as if it had never been there at all. Cable lowered his rifle, slowly, exhaling. Whatever it wasn't afraid of him, and that meant it was smart enough to know it didn't have to be. He checked the scanner again. The energy pulse was still there, still northwest. He tightened the strap on his rifle, squared his shoulders, and started moving. Whatever was waiting for him out there, the council's briefing hadn't mentioned it, which meant it was probably the only thing on this planet worth finding. The trek toward the Sin northwest took him into the swamp's true heart, where the air thickened until every breath felt like it had weight. The canopy overhead pressed in, a lattice of vine and fungal growth that blotted out the sky. Light came in thin, green-tinted shafts, catching on drifting motes that clung to his visor. The ground underfoot alternated between patches of springy moss and sudden pools of opaque water, forcing him to test every step before committing his weight. Cable moved with a soldier's patience, rifle angled low but ready, eyes never still. The swamp sounds were deceptive layers of croaks, clicks, and soft bubbling, each one masking the others. Several times, he thought he caught the sound of movement paralleling his path, but when he stopped, the noise stopped too. The scanner pulsed in his hand, the signal now strong enough to break through most of the interference. He crouched behind a curtain of dangling moss and peered through. Ahead, the ground rose into a shelf of dark rock, its surface veined with faint, bluish light that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. The energy reading was coming from beyond it. A low chittering made him pivot. What stepped into view from between? 2 fungal trunks was humanoid, at least in outline, but the details were alien enough to twist the breath in his chest. The figure's skin was a mottled gray, traced with glowing veins like the rock behind it. 2 ridged, chitinous horns swept back from its elongated skull, and its eyes, silver, luminous, without pupils, holding a depth that spoke of more than animal instinct. It didn't raise a weapon. It didn't flinch at his rifle. Instead, it spoke, the voice a rasp threaded with harmonics. Peace, outsider. I mean you no harm. Cable's finger hovered near the trigger. The words were accented, deliberate. You can talk. I am. Kazan, the being said, inclining its head slightly. Shaman of the Vexendai, we have watched you since you fell from the sky. The title hung in the air between them, heavy with context he didn't yet understand. Why watch me? Few come here by choice. Fewer still survive the first day. Kazan's gaze slid briefly toward the direction the horned beast had gone. Fewer still meet the cracks and live. Cable lowered his rifle, but didn't. Holster it. You know about that thing? It knows about you, Kazan said simply, then gestured toward the rock shelf. Come, there is more you should see. Instinct warned him about following a stranger deeper into unknown terrain. But another instinct, the one that kept him alive when plans fell apart, said this was the first real lead he'd had. He fell in behind the shaman, boots crunching softly on the mossy surface. They passed through a narrow cleft in the rock, the glowing veins brightening as they went. On the other side, the swamp gave way to a hidden valley, cradled between jagged spires. Structures unlike anything he'd seen rose from the ground, organic, curving, almost grown rather than built, their walls alive with bioluminescence that shifted in soft patterns. Beings of a dozen species moved through the settlement. Some he recognized from council space, others utterly foreign. No guards, no cages, just the easy movement of people in a place they considered home. This, Kazan said, voice tinged with pride, is Narkikon, a sanctuary for the discarded. Cable turned slowly, taking it in. The council doesn't know about this place. The council does not care, Kazan replied. To them, we are the forgotten, exiles, criminals, the inconvenient. They send us here to be erased. Vexus Prime was meant to be our prison, but we made it our refuge. The words settled like a weight in Cable's chest. So that was the truth. Vexus Prime wasn't just dangerous by nature. It was a dumping ground, a way to vanish those who challenged the council's authority. And you? He asked quietly. Why show me this? Kazan's silver eyes caught the valley's glow, reflecting it like a mirror. Because you were sent here to die, Commander Barnes. But you have a choice now: fade into the swamp like the others, or stand with those who refuse to disappear. Cable felt the rifle's strap against his shoulder, the reassuring weight of it. Somewhere far above, Vorith and Cyril would be congratulating themselves on a problem solved. He could almost see their smug faces. No, not yet. Not ever. He met Kazan's gaze. Show me what I need to know. The shaman nodded once, the gesture carrying a gravity that felt like the closing of a pact. Around them, the lights of Narkikin pulsed brighter, as if the valley itself had been listening. Dawn came to Narkikon as a slow blooming of light through the green mist, the bioluminescent walls dimming as the sky above the valley brightened. Cable was already awake, standing at the overlook where the narrow pass spilled into the swamp below. His armor was half buckled, rifle slung across his back, eyes scanning the horizon. He'd learned in his first few days here that Vexus Prime didn't give warnings twice. The alarm came as a low, thrumming horn from somewhere in the settlement. Vexandai hunters appeared on the high ridges, their silhouettes tense. Cable saw the movement, then a ripple in the distant marsh, dark shapes breaking through the mist in disciplined formation. Not swamp predators, soldiers. Kazan approached. From behind, the long shadows of morning catching in the glowing veins of his skin. Council craft, he said grimly. Small, fast. A test of our walls. Cable's jaw tightened. He'd expected the council to check up on him, but he hadn't expected them to be so quick or so bold. They're here for a look at me, he said, and to remind you what happens when you shelter their enemies. Then we will remind them why they feared to tread here before, Kazan replied. Cable moved fast, his voice sharp and efficient as he barked orders to the Vexandai. Warriors. We funnel them into the low marsh by the obsidian pillars. Hunters on the ridges, wait for my mark before you fire. No heroics. We fight smart, not loud. He grabbed a stack of crude, but effective explosive pods from a supply crate and tossed them to a young hunt leader. Set these in the bog pockets, make them think the ground's solid until it's not. The first council squad broke into view minutes later. Armored figures moving in tight formation, visors gleaming. They advanced straight into the killing ground Cable had marked. When the lead soldier's boot punched through the moss and sank to the knee, Cable lifted a hand and snapped it down. The bog erupted. Explosive pods sent geysers of fetid water and shrapnel skyward, breaking their cohesion. Before they could recover, crossbow-like energy casters from the ridges lanced into them, forcing them to scatter. That was when Ozra struck. The cracks burst from the tree line with a bellow that shook the pillars. Cable saw 3 soldiers turn, their rifles up toward the looming bulk, but the beast was faster, closing the distance in a surge of claws and muscle, smashing one into the swamp and flinging another like a rag doll. The third turned to run and went down under a Vexandai hunter's blade. The fight lasted less than 5 minutes. The survivors fled, weapons abandoned, splashing wildly into the marsh. Cable didn't bother to order a pursuit. He wanted them to carry their story back to the council, but the victory tasted bitter. Kazan lay on the moss near the pass, one hand pressed to a charred wound in his side, the faint glow in his veins flickering. Cable dropped to one knee beside him. "Heart that thinks," Kazan rasped, gripping Cable's arm with surprising strength. "Beneath the mountains, it remembers." His silver eyes searched Cable's face as if memorizing it. "Do not let them break this world." "I won't," Cable said, voice low but steady. Kazan's hand loosened. The light in his veins dimmed to nothing. Cable rose slowly, every motion deliberate, forcing down the tight knot in his chest. He turned to the gathered Visandai warriors. "You saw what they sent today. They'll send more, stronger. We can't just hold this valley and wait for the tide." He looked toward the jagged peaks beyond. "We take the fight to them. End this before they decide to finish what they started." From the crowd, a figure stepped forward, Henin Sora, her council uniform stripped of insignia, eyes bright with defiance. "Then you'll want this," she said, holding out a slim black data module, fleet schedules, command codes, everything we need to reach the spire without being turned to slag. Cable took it, meeting her gaze. "You're out now. No going back." "I know," she said, "but I didn't join to guard tyrants." He felt the weight of the valley at his back, the people, the lives, the quiet defiance in the way they lay. Stood shoulder to shoulder. He'd come to Vexus Prime as a dead man walking. Now he had something worth fighting for, and he was done waiting for the council to come to him. The stars outside the Raven's canopy were a frozen sea, pinpricked with distant fire. Somewhere beyond them lay the council's spire, an impossible needle of metal and crystal, stabbing into the void above their capital world. Cable sat forward, in the pilot's chair, jaw set, as Enin Sora read off the coordinates from the stolen module. They'd left Vexus Prime 3 days earlier under a cloud of green lightning, carrying more than weapons. The Raven's cramped hold was packed with outcasts, Vixandai hunters in scavenged armor, exiled engineers with makeshift tech rigs, a handful of humans who'd found their way to the planet's refuge before him, and Ozra crouched in a corner. That seemed too small for the beast, muscles coiled and eyes half-lidded, yet alert. Sora leaned in. "We have a 3-minute gap in patrol rotation around the spire's docking ring. We miss that, we don't get another chance." Cable didn't look away from the viewport. "And we won't miss it." The journey into the heart of council space was a needle-threading exercise. Sora's codes ghosted them past patrol sweeps, their transponder broadcasting as an unremarkable maintenance craft. They skimmed the edges of restricted zones, slid between blind spots in orbital sensor nets. It felt too easy, and Cable's gut told him that meant someone was watching, just not ready to spring the trap. When the spire finally came into view, it dominated the starscape, kilometers of faceted crystal and alloy, spinning slowly above the capital's shimmering surface. Docks branched from its central column like the limbs of some enormous sea creature. They hit the window exactly. The Raven latched onto Dock 12 with a hiss of locking clamps. Cable's team moved fast, splitting into 3 units. One to plant charges on the spire's comm array, another to sabotage the internal security feeds, and Cable's own strike cell tasked with getting to the convocation chamber before the council realized their guests weren't here for repairs. The spire's interior was a cathedral of light and shadow, its walls alive with flowing Gata glyphs. The air smelled faintly of ozone and cold metal. They moved through service corridors, avoiding main concourses where the crystal-armored guards patrolled in formation. Every footstep was measured. Every door opened with stolen codes in a silent prayer that no one had changed the locks. They were halfway to the chamber when the first alarm wailed high, keening, impossible to ignore. Somewhere in the spire, one of their teams had been spotted. Cable's come crackled with a hunter's voice. Charges set, cutting it close. He pushed the pace. At the final junction, they hit Resistance 3 guards, crystalline lances. Leveled, Ozra erupted from the service hatch behind them with a roar that rattled the walls, scattering the guards like dry leaves. Cable didn't break stride, moving past the sprawled bodies into the chamber's outer doors. The convocation chamber was exactly as he remembered, a vast amphitheater, tiers of alien dignitaries rising around a central dais. Vorth and Serral were there, locked in a murmured argument that broke off the moment the human and his entourage stepped into the light. You were meant to be. Vorth began, then stopped, eyes flicking to Ozra. The serpent's composure slipped for the first time. Cable's voice carried, steady and cold. Meant to be dead? I know, but Vexus Prime had other plans. Behind him, the chamber doors sealed with a heavy clang. Sora moved to the dais control panel, fingers dancing over the crystalline keys. The air shimmered as the chamber's projection feeds came alive, broadcasting this moment across the spire's networks. Serral rose, the light refracting in hard planes off his crystalline body. You've overstepped, human. This is the heart of the Council's power. You think you can. That's exactly what I think, Cable cut in. And I'm not alone. The feeds shifted images of Nar-Kikon's glowing valley, the Visandai standing proud, the pylons buried in the mountains, and the dossiers of thousands exiled without trial. The chamber filled with the murmurs of council members who had never seen the evidence laid bare. Serral's crystalline surface flickered with a crackle of stress. Vorith's coils tightened. You've doomed yourself, the Chancellor hissed. Cable's mouth curved in something almost like a smile. Maybe. Or maybe I've just lit a fire you can't put out. Outside, in the spire's upper levels, the first of the charges detonated, brief flashes that knocked out comm arrays and turned the chamber's feeds into a one-way broadcast to every world under the Council's thumb dot for the first time since he'd stepped into this hall weeks ago to accept their commendation. Cable felt the shift power tilting, control slipping from their hands into his dot, and he wasn't done yet. The convocation chamber shook again, a low rumble rolling through its crystal ribs as another set of charges went off high above. Fragments of light from the shattered comm arrays rained down like falling stars. The council tiers rippled with alarm, alien dignitaries shifting, whispering, their voices feeding into a rising tide of fear. Cable stood in the center of it, boots planted on the dais as if he'd been born to stand there. Ozra paced at his flank, each slow step punctuated by the scrape of claws on crystal, amber eyes locked on the two beings who had signed his death order. Chancellor Vorith's coils, bunched tight, golden eyes unblinking. Whatever you think you've accomplished here, human, it will not last. Cut the feed, and the council will. The words died as Sora brought another feed online. This one, not from the Spire systems, but from a hardline data core smuggled in from Vexus Prime. The hologram bloomed in the air above them, a jagged map of the Maelstrom sector, overlaid with pulsing red nodes. Cable's voice was steady, each word a hammer blow. These are your special programs, worlds you've turned into prisons, populations you've erased from your records. You built pylons to make those planets look uninhabitable, so you could vanish anyone who threatened your control. Gasps broke out across the tiers. A Vireland delegate rose, her translucent fins quivering. Is this true, Chancellor? Vorith's eyes flicked to Cyril, the two trading a glance that confirmed more than any denial could. But Cable wasn't finished. You didn't just exile people, he said, stepping forward. You experimented on them? On us. Another hologram sprang to life schematics of neural scans, genetic profiles, tagged human subset bond response. Study. Generations of humans were biotuned to bond with the apex predator of Vexus Prime. You wanted leashable, warlord's half-soldier, half-beast handler, something you could control. A ripple of outrage moved through the chamber. Cyril's crystalline body chimed sharply as fractures began to form in his polished surface. The bond was unstable. It failed. Cable looked down at Ozra, whose tail swept the floor in a slow arc. It failed because it can't be forced. The cracks don't bow to cruelty. They choose. Ozra rumbled, a deep, rolling sound that vibrated through the dais. As if in answer, the chamber's light shifted, dimmed, then flared again, not from the Spire systems, but from the feed itself. The Maelstrom map dissolved into a new pattern, sweeping veins of bioluminescence, branching, and pulsing like a living neural network. Kazan's last words echoed in Cable's mind. The heart that thinks? Beneath the mountains, Sora's eyes widened. That's not just terrain mapping. That's a mind, Cable finished. Vexus Prime is sentient. It's been watching, listening, and it's not alone. Across the map, other threads lit up other prison worlds, their living ecologies stirring an answer. A silence fell, heavy and absolute. Even the guards froze, caught in the enormity of it. The Council's crimes were no longer just against people, they were against worlds. Vorith tried to recover, his voice oily with practiced authority. If what you say is true, then the Council must be the one to manage this knowledge. For stability, Cable cut him off with a glare. No, you don't get to bury the truth again. From this day, the exile programs are finished. Every world you've chained will be freed. The beings responsible will stand trial under the Charter of Free Worlds. You presume to dictate terms? Saral hissed, glass edges splintering. I'm not presuming, Cable said. I'm telling you how it's going to be. Ozra stepped forward, lowering his massive head until his teeth were inches from Cyril's faceted torso. The Archon went still, cracks spiderwebbing deeper across his crystalline form. Cable turned to the assembled tiers, raising his voice. So, it carried to every corner of the chamber and through every still-functioning broadcast node across the galaxy. The Council's era of fear is over. The forgotten will be forgotten no more. This is the age of the free. The response wasn't cheers. Not yet, but the roar of countless voices speaking at once. In anger, in relief, in the raw disbelief. Of people seeing the bars of their cage for the first time. When he strode from the dais, Sora at his side and Ozra pacing like a shadow, the guards didn't move to stop him. Some even stepped aside. Behind him, Vorith's voice rose and futile. Command, already swallowed by the sound of a galaxy awakening dot out in the docking ring. The Raven's engines spun up, their rumble a promise of what came next. Cable cast one last glance at the spire, its faceted crown catching the light like a dying star. Somewhere in the projection feeds, the bioluminescent network still pulsed. One distant node blinking a steady, urgent red dot. Another world. Another. Call for help. Cable rested a hand on Ozra's neck. Looks like we're not done yet, old friend. The beast rumbled in agreement, and together they lifted into the black.